So you want to stop enemies in tracks like cold Russian winter? Well, Zarya is the hero for you. And also, I apologize. We will never be doing any accents. That will never happen again. In today's video, we're going to take an in-depth look at Zarya, covering everything you need to know about the female winter soldier. First, we'll cover Zarya's strengths. Zarya has very high damage potential, not just for a tank, but for most heroes in the game. Her barrier essentially provides short-term invulnerability. She can carry bad teams when used right. Half of her health is a shield, so it regenerates without the need of a healer. And finally, Graviton Surge is amazing at setting up just about every other ultimate in the game. Now, just like every other hero, Zarya has some weaknesses. Zarya has lower HP than other tanks in the game. Her barriers can be very hard to time due to their very short duration. She can only shield one ally at a time. Winston, Reinhardt, and D.Va can both shield more. She also has no armor. So now that we've gone over her strengths and weaknesses, basically giving you an overview of how she plays, let's go over some of her abilities. I'll give you all the numbers you need to know, as well as successful strategies for using these abilities. Zarya's passive is Energy. Damage blocked with Zarya's barriers increases the damage of her particle cannon. Energy increases by 3 for every 5 damage absorbed by one of Zarya's barriers, and energy depletes at a rate of 2 per second. You can read how much energy you have right below your crosshair. It's a number from 0 to 100. Also, it's important to note that enemies can essentially see about how much energy you have, because your player model grows brighter the more you get. We won't cover strategies for using Zarya's energy here because Zarya's passive interacts directly with her main weapon, which is her particle cannon. The primary fire on Zarya's particle cannon is her particle beam. Zarya unleashes a short-range beam of destructive energy. It will not be blocked by D.Va's defense matrix or Genji's deflect, but it will be blocked by Winston's barrier, Reinhardt's shields, and other Zarya barriers. Zarya holds 100 rounds at a time, and her particle beam uses 20 rounds per second. It deals damage between 80 and 150 per second based on charge. This damage scales linearly with how much charge she has. 50 charge means her base damage is increased by 50%. Her particle beam has a surprisingly long range, coming in at 15 meters. She cannot headshot with this ability. The alternate fire on her particle cannon is her explosive charge. Zarya can launch an explosive charge that deals AoE damage 2 meters around wherever it hits. It uses the same 100 ammo as the particle beam, but uses 25 per shot. Zarya can fire her explosive charge at a rate of 1 per second. It deals between 46 and 95 damage, once again scaling linearly with her charge. Zarya can rocket jump with this ability, although it isn't very effective, and she can deal a maximum of 50 damage to herself if she hits it into a wall or the ground near her. Self-damage will not charge Zarya's energy. So what does that big mess of numbers mean? Well, whenever you're 1v1ing, you should be using your particle beam because it has a higher single target DPS than your explosive charge. Remember, it has a range of 15 meters. It actually isn't that short, so you can damage enemies that are somewhat far away from you. Use your explosive charge when enemies are clumped up or you are out of the range of your particle beam. Personally, I love firing explosive charges off at long ranges because they deal pretty good damage. It can also be used to hit enemies in small rooms or who have just rounded a corner and you have lost line of sight of them. It is also great for taking out stationary enemies like Bastion and Torbjorn turrets. One neat trick you can perform is firing your explosive charge right when you're about to run out of ammo when firing your main particle beam. It costs 25 rounds normally, but if you only have 1 round in the magazine, it will still fire the shot. So right at the end, right before you're about to have to reload, firing an explosive charge will increase the damage you dealt with your whole magazine. The biggest tip I can give you guys when using your particle cannon is don't think you're unstoppable when you're on full charge. I've done this, you've done this, everyone's done this. You hear Zarya yell, maximum charge, and you just go Rambo mode, run into all the enemies, and usually die. 100 charge is great, however you are still a tank and you are not your team's main source of damage. Don't play too aggressively, keep using your barriers to protect you and your team, and try to keep your charge at 100 or as close to it as possible without overextending. Now let's talk about Zarya's barriers. Zarya can cast a barrier on herself or a teammate within 30 meters. Currently, both barriers shield for 2 seconds for a maximum of 200 damage. The cooldown on Particle Barrier, which is the one you place on yourself, is 10 seconds. The cooldown of your Projected Barrier, which goes on a teammate, is 8 seconds. When either barrier absorbs damage, Zarya gains energy, which we talked about before. One useful thing to know is the final instance of damage that breaks the barrier will not penetrate. For example, if your barrier can only absorb 10 more damage and you get hit with Junkrat's Riptire, you will not take damage. This makes Zarya's barriers great against Junkrat's Riptire, D.Va's Self-Destruct, and Tracer's Pulse Bomb, as they deal all their damage at once. Your barriers also prevent you from taking any sort of debuff. Basically, you can't be stunned, you can't be slowed, Reinhardt can't pin you, you can't be booped off the map by a Lucio, so basically almost nothing can happen to you when you're under the effect of a Zarya's barrier. Timing your barriers can be tricky, so here are some tips for using them. First, make sure you go into settings and click on Zarya. Make sure you enable friendly HP bars. With this on, you can now more easily use your barriers. Use your barriers on teammates when you see their health going down or when you anticipate they are about to be hit by an enemy ability. Examples of this include teammates near a Roadhog so you can prevent the hook, teammates near Mei so you can neglect the freeze, or teammates near close range heroes like Reaper and Tracer. Use your self barrier in the same situations. Your barriers also synergize very well with many other ultimates in the game. Putting a barrier on a Genji or a Reaper while they use their ultimates will prove to be extremely powerful. Your barrier also somewhat works well with Tracer's Pulse Bomb, as you give her the protection she needs to get close to the enemy team to place it. Finally, your barrier also synergizes very well with Bastion, Roadhog, and Soldier 76 ultimates, as they all attract a lot of attention when using them. Zarya's final ability and her ultimate is Graviton Surge. Zarya launches a gravity bomb that draws in enemy combatants and deals damage while they're trapped. It lasts 4 seconds and sucks everyone in within 8 meters, and it deals an oddly specific 22 damage. Graviton Surge might be the best ability for setting up other ultimates in the game. Sucking in everyone within an 8-meter radius is a pretty powerful effect that isn't too hard to land. Most teams are oftentimes grouped up within an 8-meter radius, so you can get all of them in one clump. It's important to note that enemies can still use all of their abilities while trapped by your Graviton Surge. A few of them can even escape. Tracer, Reinhardt, Genji, Reaper, D.Va, Widowmaker, and Mercy all have forms of movement that allow them to escape from the zone. You will often see abilities like Sound Barrier and Transcendence used when Zarya ults the enemy team. When this happens, step back and make sure you're only firing at enemies from a safe range, because all of the enemies are most likely to live with those powerful friendly effects on them, so you basically have 6 enemies in a very small area, which will turn out to be pretty deadly. As I've mentioned before, Graviton Surge synergizes very well with just about every other ultimate in the game, so it's critically important to let your team know when you're using it and when it's online, and it's best used when your teammates have one of the following abilities ready: D.Va's Self-Destruct, Junkrat's Riptire, Tracer's Pulse Bomb, Reaper's Death Blossom, Pharah's Barrage, and Bastion. Just Bastion, because a Bastion in Sentry mode can deal some serious damage, and if he has his ultimate, he can do even more. And then finally, Hanzo's Dragon Strike. Now let's go over all of the hero matchups you'll encounter when you're playing Zarya. First, we'll talk about the good matchups, those being Winston, Genji, Mei, Lucio, Zenyatta, Soldier 76, D.Va, Symmetra, McCree, and Roadhog. As you can see, this list is pretty long because Zarya counters a lot of heroes when played right. Heroes like Roadhog, Mei, and Lucio will all want to hook you, freeze you, or knock you back, respectively. Using your barriers properly will deny them of using these abilities and therefore make them less effective. Heroes like Winston and Genji you can simply out DPS at close range. Genji relies a lot on his deflect to outplay enemies, and he can't even deflect your particle beam. Winston, you can straight out 1v1, and your beam will deal more damage than his Tesla cannon, which means you'll win the fight as long as he doesn't block too much of your damage with his barrier. Against Soldier 76 with proper barrier usage, you will increase your damage and decrease his, meaning you'll win the 1v1. McCree falls into a similar boat as Mei, Lucio, and Roadhog because he wants to flashbang you. I was very close to putting this in the even matchup section because there's a good chance sometimes McCree will flashbang you and you won't have time to react and activate your shield. There are actually two reasons, though, I ended up putting him in the good category. For one, if he actually does flashbang you, after he fans the hammer, he won't have enough damage to kill you anymore after the nerf. So you can then activate your shield and start shooting at him. Oftentimes, after his first fan the hammer, he will simply roll and fan the hammer again, meaning sometimes he'll actually hit your shield. When this happens, you can more easily win the fight because he just gave you damage and he has to reload. If he doesn't fan the hammer right away, to avoid hitting your shield, you will have 2 seconds to shoot at him without him shooting back, which is oftentimes enough to kill him. Zenyatta, D.Va, and Symmetra all fall into their own categories. Zenyatta is simply not meant for combat, and you can remove his Orb of Discord. Symmetra you will beat in 1v1 combat up close, and you can take out a whole group of her turrets simply with one explosive charge. And D.Va, all you have to do is stand like an inch away from her, and her fusion cannons will deal no damage. Before we move on to the even matchups, we'll talk about the bad ones, and these are the ones that you should avoid if you can. These are Pharah, Widowmaker, Bastion, and Hanzo. Hanzo and Widowmaker will almost always be out of the range of your particle beam, and it's going to be hard to land your explosive charge on them when they're elevated above you and far away. Also, you usually can't see who they're going to shoot or when they're going to shoot, so you won't be able to use your barriers effectively against them. On top of all this, you have no movement abilities and low mobility, so they're going to just headshot you all day long. Pharah is simply a hard target to hit. She'll almost always be out of the range of your particle beam, and when she's in the air, you're going to find it extremely hard to hit her with your explosive charge, so I would just avoid her if you can. Finally, a Bastion in Sentry mode simply does not care if you have a shield on yourself or a teammate. He does so much damage, he will shoot right through your shield and take you out before you even realize how much charge he gave you. And now let's move on to the even matchups, the ones that rely on player skill and whatever's happening in a certain situation. These are Junkrat, Torbjorn, Reinhardt, Tracer, Reaper, Zarya, and Mercy. Torbjorn and Mercy will most likely both be pretty far away from you at all times, meaning neither of you will really be damaging each other, which in my opinion is an even matchup. Tracer is simply just annoying to you. You deal pretty good damage at close range, and your splash damage makes her somewhat easier to hit when she's moving around all across the map, but when she gets the drop on you, she will chunk a decent portion of your health off, if not kill you. Reaper is the same way. If you see a Reaper coming, you can oftentimes use your barrier and give yourself a lot of charge and a huge advantage over the Reaper, and it can usually get you the kill. But if you don't see him coming, it's usually lights out for you because you're going to need a fast barrier to protect you from death, and even that might not save you because of all the damage he's already done. Reinhardt and Junkrat are both just going to be a mess of a fight. If you're up close, it's going to be whoever lands their hits on the other person, Reinhardt with his hammer swings and Junkrat with his frag grenades. And if you're far away, you're most likely not going to be doing damage to each other because A, Reinhardt can't really do damage at long ranges, and you and Junkrat will just be dodging each other's projectiles, so it's kind of a mess and I'd call it even. And that's pretty much all we have to cover today. This guide was a lot shorter than my other Ultimate guides, and I was wondering why, and I think it's simply because all of Zarya's abilities revolve around energy and her main weapon. Like, everything works together. So when we explained one thing, we kind of explained everything, which cut down the time in the video. Also, a lot of Zarya's abilities are just going to require practice. I can't tell you when to use your barrier simply because it's something you're going to have to get the feel for. Sure, I can tell you to use it when teammates are low or when they're taking damage, but that's common knowledge. So you guys are going to need to practice with Zarya. You're going to need to get a feel for her because she's definitely one of those heroes you don't just pick up and play. You need to get the feel for her. So, hopefully you all enjoyed. If this video was helpful, be sure to tell me down below. And if you didn't think I did a good job on this video, tell me how I can improve in the next one. I feel my videos this week feel a little bit off. I don't know. This video just didn't feel like I made it, and I don't know how to explain it. But tomorrow's video, guys, I'm actually really excited for Friday's video. We're starting a new weekly series, Overwatch related, obviously. And I think it's going to be one of the more helpful ones. So hopefully you guys all enjoyed. I'll see you all later. Lone Hawk out.